want here. Yeah, James doubling up the Clippers. Clean up on aisle three. Clean up on aisle three. Someone call someone because there's a clean up on aisle three as a man is down.
Away by Buffon. And then Ronaldo.
Hello, people, and welcome back to the Out of Bounds channel. This isn't really a podcast; it's a live show, which is why we also had the old intro because the new one was moving weird for some reason. But before we're gonna get the so obviously last week we had the big three, and before we're getting a super team this week, but it's back to the dynamic duo with me and Sam. So, Sam, how you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm good, bro. Like you said, the dynamic duo is back here. I'm Kobe, you're Shaq. So let's, we're trying to do the three-piece. So let's do it, man. But I'm good, man. How are you, bro?
Now, as I said, it's been a very, I don't know if to call it weird week in sports. Obviously, international break is always here again. And with football being your main sports in England, it's always going to feel like there's nothing going on. But there's always been NBA and other sports to keep us entertained. But today, the two things we're going to touch on today is the boxing event called the Day of Reckoning on the 23rd of December, I believe. So just over a month away. And the Las Vegas Grand Prix, because that happened a few days ago and it had a lot of mixed reactions. So we're just going to have our take on it. So obviously, just talk about the boxing event. Obviously, what was your first take on it when it was first announced?
I was actually surprised because, they've been talking about this card where AJ and Fury fight on the same bill and then hopefully they're able to fight together. That's the maturation, and then they'll fight on an undercard with Fury and whoever he fights. So I was very surprised that it came about because I heard Eddie Hearn, he was talking for a while, like, got some big news coming up. So when I saw it announced, I was surprised. And when I saw who AJ was fighting, Otto Wilder, I was like, very interesting. But I guess they do want to make that super fight of Wilder against AJ or AJ versus Wilder. So it makes sense why he's fighting that opponent. I've been seeing that AJ's been training with Fury's old trainer, Ben Davison. And what I've seen from it, it seems like, obviously this is just training, From what I've seen, it seems like we're going to get some of the old AJ back with that ferocity, that viciousness. And we just need AJ to be hungry and essentially go back to that road AJ, where he fought Dylan White, when he fought Vladimir Klitschko, when he fought all those fights. We don't need that tentative AJ because when he's tentative, he has time to think. We don't get the best of him. So in terms of a card, it's a bit of a dope card. Like in terms of everyone's on there, you've got AJ, Wiley, you've got Wilder versus Parker, you've got Bivol on there, you've got who else? Let me have a look. You've got Dubois versus Baby Miller, you've got Herkovich as well. So I think it's going to be a jam-packed card. It's going to be dope. And it'll be interesting to see how everything unfolds and if we are able to get that next fight, which is going to be AJ against Wilder. What's your thoughts on it anyway?
Obviously, just before I give my thoughts on it, I just want to ask you, see with the whole AJ training with Ben Davison, I tried to look it up, but I wasn't able to get a straight answer. Is Ben Davison just the trainer for this fight and Derek James is coming back, or is it being because AJ hasn't lost with Derek James, and you can see he's always talking about learning from Derek James and living in somewhere in Texas and all that kind of stuff. But I said it was a bit weird to see, especially as Tyson Fury's old trainer training. But obviously, I heard some stuff about it because the fight is a quick turnaround and it wouldn't be possible to fly back and forth and stuff. I don't know if you've heard anything on if.
It's funny you say that. I haven't really heard much, but obviously, as you said, in the last few fights, AJ has been changing fighters and picking different fighters. We did see the last few fights has been Derek James. And that just might be the situation. You might just be using Ben Davison for specific parts of it, striking or whatnot. And then you've got, the main head coach in the corner for the fight, just to give his overall blueprint. But I don't know what the actual specifics are.
The way it sounded, it doesn't feel like Derek James will be in the corner that night.
Okay.
from what I've seen. It looks like it might be full on.
If that is the case, that's very, surprising because again, you don't want to be chopping and changing trainers. But yeah, if there's a thing around, flights and logistics, that does kind of make sense. But let's see. We don't know what's going to happen. But if he does have Ben Davison, I think Ben Davison is a decent coach to get him through Otto Island. You think if he is going to fight a Wilder or a Tyson Fury, I wouldn't mind Ben Davison being in his corner, but I would say have another experienced coach. That
mind you as well, like the first Tyson Fury and the Wilder fight, Ben Davison was the corner for Tyson Fury in his first mega fight back, and Tyson Fury kind of scored Wilder, which it was a fight that everyone knew that he won, even though it was given as a draw. So, but then two different fighters, anyways.
I was about to say that's more of Wilder's stuff, not Wilder. That's more Fury style anyway. He's more of a boxer, so he just needs someone that's going to just kind of amp him up to keep on boxing. Whereas AJ is not necessarily a boxer; he's more of a puncher. So you need a bit of a combination of people that can give you tactics in terms of when they can see that you're making errors and making adjustments, as well as someone that can say, "Oh, do this, do that." So it'll be interesting to see how the camp moves forward and other fights, how AJ picks his training team.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, it was a thing because you talk about timeline of events, and it's a thing where obviously Tyson Fury was originally meant to fight Usyk on the 23rd, and then you have the whole situation where he goes in against Ngannou. The Ngannou fight didn't go as planned. You can see he's bruised and stuff like that, and now you're giving him a 2-month turnaround to try and rest up, recover, and then also put in an 8-week training camp for this fight as well, which it wouldn't just seem possible, wouldn't be in the smartest interest of Tyson Fury. And then obviously he says after the fight that he will see you next year. So it's then becoming a thing, what is going to happen on that day. And I think before even Joshua was announced, because Frank Warren was talking about how we're going to have an amazing card and things like that. And obviously the first thing you think about is going to be Joshua Wilder. But then if Frank Warren is going in, so what I was saying is, when Frank Warren was going on about it and we were hearing about Wilder and Joshua, Frank Warren doesn't really promote any of those fighters. So you're thinking it's kind of the cards that you can put on. And then the first thing you hear is Joseph Parker versus Wilder will be fighting on that day, which obviously you always want Wilder and Joshua, but I wasn't too mad at that anyways, because Wilder's a former world champion, Joseph Parker's a former world champion. It'll be a decent main event, and you haven't seen Wilder in the ring. You've only seen Wilder in the ring once since he fought through, which he got a knockout within 1 minute or whatever it was. So I wasn't mad about it. Then you start hearing the list of fights that are coming out. We heard Joshua's fighting Wallin, which I think that is a decent fight for the quick turnaround that it is. But then I have heard interviews where Joshua has spoken about if he was the one that fought Wallin, you would hear this and not discrediting Wilder, but saying that's not the caliber of fight that someone of Tyson Fury's things should be going for. So you hear that, then I think you hear about Dubois versus
Baby Miller.
I didn't even know he was back on the scene. I won't even lie to you, but I think I can't say drug test aside because it's a big thing in boxing, but he's one of the best talkers in boxing, if you get what I mean. And
for sure.
When you watch the press conference, everything he was just saying, Dubois is just it's a great fight. I know that.
Dubois is like a Frank Bruno. They're not really quick-witted. They're not witty with their vibes and talking. Their mouthpiece.
And I also think that with the business of boxing, especially where it's been hard to make fights and you talk about promoters wanting to make the most money as possible and things like that, I think boxing has evolved in the sense whereas in having to kind of be a good trash talker is something you need to learn, because without it, you're not really going to be able to, you hear a lot of people in boxing talk about how comes the influencers can make this kind of money and all that kind of stuff, but it's because of the personality and the brand they've been able to build for themselves. And I think Eddie Hearn has mentioned in the past, whereas in boxers are going to have to learn how to start building themselves as a bit of a brand. You can't just be a great fighter, you need to be a great talker as well for these press conferences. And you see why Tyson Fury has been able to go on to do well. And as a big Baby Miller, we don't know about his talent, but you now want to see what he can do because of the way he can talk. You hear about Tyson Fury, Deontay Wilder. Everyone always brings up that clip of when he was fighting Dominic. Is it Dominic Brazil?
Brazil.
Yeah, and stuff like that. When he talks about boxing is the only sport where you can kill him when you can get paid to do it and all that kind of stuff. And I think Joshua is decent at mic as well. So I think Dubois needs to. But I said the press conference, and then when Big Baby started going after Joshua as well, I think that was absolutely.
But it was good though, because it meant like he was like, wait, look, Mumsy's here. Look, the rent's due, bro. The rent's due. Like he's still paying rent to Mumsy.
So I think the personalities on the card, and you saw Deontay Wilder take such a laid back approach to it as well, whereas in Anthony Joshua was the one that came out with more of the aggression, something to prove, which I've always said anyways, like obviously I think Anthony Joshua, I don't know now anymore, but if you were talking about 2-3 years ago, he had one of the best PRs in boxing. Everyone talks about he's for the kids, great role model and all that kind of stuff. But I always said you're going to be a professional fighter, there's always going to be some sort of a loose screw because nobody
wants to get paid to get their face punched in.
Yeah, you get where I'm coming from, and I think you're kind of seeing it, especially when he doesn't have the world championships by his side and stuff like that. And even you can see the face-to-face with Wallen, because I think Wallen said something about Joshua isn't the same guy as he used to be, or something along those lines. Yeah. And Joshua was like, don't shake my hand if you're going to talk BS. Make sure you stand on it. I know that kind of stuff. So I think...
business.
Yeah, and who would have thought like Frank Warren, Charlie Finkel, Eddie, and they said like 12 promoters were there at that fight, like coming together. So just another question. So obviously with Saudi coming into play, because I remember we spoke about it before, and I don't know if I implied or someone else implied it, we were talking about how maybe Saudi have kind of ruined boxing in terms of if the fights are not happening in Saudi, you can't make the big fights. Do you not think it's changing to the point of Saudi is now saving boxing?
I think in some instances they are. Saudi's essentially becoming like the UFC of boxing because they can stump up so much money, the best fights are most likely going to happen. Because we've seen in this situation where, like you said, you have Shelley Finkel, you have Frank Warren, and you have Eddie Hearn, all on the same bill, promoting a fight, which none of them have like the promotional rights to, but they're on there selling their fighters. So it showed you that Saudi coming into it has been able to bring fighters together and make these big fights happen, because before it's always like, can we get the budget? And with what Saudi is trying to do with their PR and their image, it only helps boxing in a sense for the heavyweights. If they're able to start doing that with like the lower weight classes, like welterweight, middleweight, and start having these super fights, then it's going to be great. Because imagine you start seeing, again, Lomachenko against Gervonta Davis, or Devin Haney versus Shakur Stevenson, or Teofimo Lopez against Devin Haney, or Inoue. If they can bring those lightweights into the scene as well, then it's going to be great for boxing, because no one's got no excuse to fight. Because a lot of those lower weight fighters are probably not even making $5 million a fight. So if Saudi's going to offer you 10 million, let's make the fight happen. There's no excuses about TV networks, because when you fight in Saudi, the promoters have no say. Basically, they pay you to come fight, and you make it happen.
Yeah. Just to do the advocates, because me, for example, to be fair, I'm not one to go to a lot of boxing like events anyways, boxing matches live. So this wouldn't really have an effect on me. But then do you think this could go down the route of different countries will not be able to make these big fights anymore? And do you think they deserve to be able to make, because I mean, I'm not gonna, obviously you can't blame Wembley or you can't blame these venues of not being able to, because at the end of the day, the fighters and the promoters want to put it on. But then if you then start putting, like, for example, everyone talks about, you see Carl Froch and
George Groves.
Yeah, that fight that happened years ago, which is one of the funniest fights that I've come across. Not because of the actual fights, but because of the fan base. You know, the Brexit, the lager drinkers, and all those country type of fans, and the way everyone comes together. Yeah, you know how big that fight was, and but then if you start having like if Joshua and Fury to fight, the likelihood of you being able to hold that in Wembley when Saudi then. Because if it's Saudi, you're making your own deals at the end of the day. It's not about 50-50 split, 40-60. You make your own deal with Saudi, and then you go into the ring and you go and fight it out.
Yeah.
How would that affect the general public in terms of like if a Fury and Joshua was to then happen in Saudi instead of happening in the home country or UK instead?
So boxing is a business, and you got to remember the fighters, they're prize fighters, so they're fighting for money. So at the end of the day, in a sense, they're mercenaries. They're going to go to the highest bidder. And at the end of the day, it's a supply and demand thing. So if there's a supply or there's a demand for the fight, then someone's just going to supply, the remuneration for the fight. And if Saudi can do that, and it means the UK don't get to hold a super fight, then you can't blame them. Because at the end of the day, these fighters need to be paid, rightfully how much they deserve. And if Saudi can put it on the table, it doesn't really matter where it happens. It happens, So I think you got to take it on a case by case, because it's not going to happen for every fight. It's basically going to be the super fights that probably Vegas can put on, but they can't offer the fighters what they want. Promoters figuring out, do you know what? Let AJ go and fight on this card to get 50 million. I still get my cut. I'm still going to make 10 million. Let's make it happen. The smaller fights and the smaller scenes will still stay in their local markets. But I think for maybe the next 3 to 4 years, the big fights will be in Saudi, in the Middle East. That's what I think, because they've got the budget to lure Spence, a Crawford, a Tank, a Lomachenko. And at the end of the day, like you said, if you're in a sport where you get your head kicked in for a living, punched in for a living, I want to make as much money as I can make within that short time.
Because with the Saudi thing as well, is at the moment, it seems to only really affect the heavyweight division.
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
When you talk about, like, let's say your Errol Spence, your Crawford, your Gervonta Davis, and all these kind of guys, these guys are still fighting in America. Do you think we'll reach a stage where those guys will start going over to Saudi, or do you think those Americans will try and keep it in-house?
No, I think it's going to get to a stage where Saudi's going to try and put on a super fight, a super card from start to finish, where it starts with, like, it'll be crazy to say this, it'll start with, an Errol Spence against a Crawford, and it finishes with a mega fight of Fury versus AJ. And I think it's going to get to a stage where they're going to hold a card, and it's going to probably be like big name title fight after big name title fight, probably have 5 fights on the card, and it's going to be a spectacle. Because I think that's the ultimate goal, to have the best of the best fighting in Saudi, and you've got a great card that's going to get eyeballs from everyone. So I do think at some point they're going to cherry pick which fighters and which fights they want to put on. They're going to see what the public are talking about. Like I said, it's a Tank versus a Devin Haney and all those guys. I think you'll end up seeing a card where it's got Fury versus AJ, Wilder against, for example, like a Dylan White. You'll also have a Spence versus Crawford and a Tank versus Haney on one card. I do see that happening within the next.
I mean, it'll be interesting to see how that works, because I think 2 things. I think fighters will have egos in terms of wanting to be the main event of the card. And
I don't think so.
But also in terms of general public, because if main event comes on around 10, stadium starts filling up around 9 o'clock. You start putting on fights like that, you're not asking people to start filling up at 6 o'clock. I don't know if boxing fan has that kind of attention span to.
But I think people will do it. And you got to realize, again, the fans that are going to be in Saudi are most likely going to be entrepreneurs, businessmen, celebrities, and casual fans. So they're going to want to see it from the beginning. And I think if you market it as, battle of the ages, or you have the right PR and promotion around it, I think it definitely can work, because you see it in the UFC. The UFC have stack cards, and you have the fan base in the arena from the prelims to the main event all the way to the last fight. So I just think it's about how you market the event and sell it to the world. But I think that's the next frontier in terms of how you want it to be. You can just see based on this card, if you look at it, like the main bones of this card, you can't really say there's really a bad fight. Even Dubois Miller, you look at it like, okay, that's entertaining. You got Bivol Sanchez, that's decent. You got Hrgovic, big punch against, I can't remember who's fighting, that's decent. Then you've got Wilder against Parker, and then AJ against Weiland. You're getting your money worth of it. So I just think the next stage is just have just superstars on a card and like say, cool, let's just run it up and do a mad thing, to be honest.
Hashtag no illegal streaming. But talking about, obviously, still staying in terms of the business of sports, we had the very first Las Vegas Grand Prix, which it kind of had a lot of mixed reactions going into the thing, because obviously you talk about the Vegas locals, the way they were shutting off like so many roads, and then even I think I saw a place. Obviously, I've never been to Vegas, so I wouldn't tell you, but there was a bridge where like they put plaster coverings over the glass so that even if you're just walking past, you can't get a glimpse. Which, I mean, I understand from the standpoint of is the highest ticket in probably Formula One this year.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's an issue, but I know it's definitely this year. But at the same time, it just seemed a bit excessive and things like that. And then you could hear Verstappen. I've never seen someone try and ruin the PR of a race weekend as much as Verstappen tried doing before
But he
the
ended up
race.
though.
Huh?
But I said he said all the stuff he said at the beginning, but then at the end, like he started to like it. But go on, bro.
Yeah. So obviously, I'll ask for your thoughts. This is why I was going to give my thoughts on the Vegas Grand Prix, because up until the start of the race, I would have felt like the Vegas Grand Prix was massively underwhelming, because I think obviously you talk about what happened in FP1 with the Sainz incident, where as in how could stuff like that, you feel like biggest race sport or biggest motorsports in the world, and you having stuff like that. And I've said it before on previous episodes on the pod where I don't understand how Formula One, and especially when you talk about the FAA and different things like that, there seems to be so many unwritten laws or so many laws that are left to chance and things like that. So you feel like simple stuff like drain covers should be things that should have been checked or tested and things like that, but it wasn't. And then you have it 9 minutes where you have the whole session cancelled. FP2, you now are not allowed fans, because now FP2 is kicking off at like 2:30 a.m. local time.
Crazy.
Fans aren't even getting their refund. They're getting like Formula One $300 worth of Formula One vouchers, which I'm guessing those guys probably pay like £800 upwards for those. Like, you can just understand everything that was happening. And then, as I said, you got Verstappen talking about how this is not a fun place to drive. He would have rioted or some BS like that. And then I think to myself, this weekend is just problem after problem after problem. But the reason I'm going to give it, and I'm not going to say it's a massive success, I'm going to say it's a small success, is because of how good the racing was. And I think Formula One always comes down to one thing of how good the race is on Sunday. Because I think qualifying will always have an element of entertainment just because of is who can finish best. But I think with the racing, and okay, so I'm not going back and forth, but I'll say two things. I think with this event is different for the people that watch on TV and people that were there live, because I do think the crowd were quite underwhelming, which I'm not saying it's any of their fault. That's just the thing I got from the TV. But just watching the race, I think you can argue it's been top 5 races this year. I think there was a lot of good overtaking and there was a fight for the win. Obviously, you had your safety cars, you had your crashes for Verstappen again with George Russell, and it was kind of everything you would want in a race. Strategy, some went for the 1 stop, some went for the 2 stop with the safety car. And I think if racing can be that good, it can kind of overcloud everything else that happened on the weekend. But I'll just ask, what was your take on the whole event?
I think it was successful in terms of, building brand F1 and, having another race in the US market. But it just showed you, like, again, some of the things goes down to the event organizer, because when we saw, for example, the first race in Miami, it was smooth sailing and it succeeded because everything was done at like the right times, palatable times. And, the promoter and the organizer of that event kind of knew what they was doing. And it just seemed like a lot of the stuff that was happening at the Vegas Grand Prix seemed like it was rushed. But they'd known about this Grand Prix happening for at least a year, 18 months. So all these little teething things should have been sorted out. With me, I've always loved the business side of Formula One and like the entertainment value. So with that, it was great, especially when you see the marketing on the Sphere. It looked dope. You saw Google, you saw the little emoji stuff. You saw the backdrop of the bright lights of Vegas. All the celebs there engaging it. We saw Shaq on the grid, and obviously Martin Brundle doing his grid walk as usual with all the celebrities. I think my issue was more so the timing as well. I don't think it was palatable for America as well in terms of it being late. We know Vegas is a city that never sleeps, and people are late, but I just don't think the race should have been at that time in Vegas as well as the UK. As a first race, in terms of entertainment value, I'll probably give it like a 7.5. I think there was a lot of entertainment. It's a shame Lewis couldn't have done better. Obviously, he had some issues. We saw Leclerc, he raced really well. It's a shame that Verstappen came back and won again, because I already said that he would win. It would be good to see a different winner on the podium for the inaugural Grand Prix. I think there's going to be some stuff that they're going to change. They're probably going to look at the timing as well. They're going to probably look at the track and make sure, all these stuff doesn't happen. And like you said, with the FIA, they're very archaic, because in terms of what happened to Sainz, he's going over, a drain lid, and he has to change his car and whatnot, and he gets penalized for that. How is that his fault? Like, it should be the race organizer and the FIA making sure that the race is good enough for you to drive and there's no external issues that are going to mess up your car. So I think those type of rules need to change. And I think Max kind of gave a good example. Like, if it's something that's out of your control, you should be able to get a free ride where it doesn't affect your qualifying. You get to change certain parts of your car, and it doesn't affect where you qualify or where you start on the grid. But yeah, apart from that, I think it was a good race. It showed the good side of F1. The only downfall was that Max won again. Is that Red Bull's 20th win of the season, or was it 19th? So again, it's not really great for the sport of F1 to have a team dominating like that. As much as we always thought Mercedes were dominating, obviously Mercedes' record was 19, and now it was broken by Red Bull 20. There's just a little change I think they need to do. So hopefully next year is better. But all in all, I think it was a decent event. But just little teething change that they need to sort out.
I think a lot of people, because as I said, the contrast from Saturday night to Sunday night in America, anyways, or should I say Friday night to Saturday night, how the event was working, as I said, it's very different. I think I was seeing a lot of conversation on Twitter, and people were talking about if Vegas can provide this, obviously, because you talk about the marketing and the business side of it, and then it can give you good racing and stuff. I think a lot of people start asking, what is the point of Miami Grand Prix at the moment? Just because it wouldn't give you the same kind of racing that Vegas, even though it's one race. I think the two Miami Grand Prix have been quite underwhelming, to say the least. And then obviously you still have another race in Texas, so it's like, why don't you just ditch the Miami one and bring the Germany one back and stuff like that? But
I think brand building and business, it would never happen. I think Miami is a great city in terms of just cultural diversity. It's in terms of the Latin side, it's big there. Miami is predominantly Spanish, and I think that's probably a market they want to break into. And just in terms of, as long as you're the race promoter and the circuit promoter, and you can provide, the deposit to host a Grand Prix, then it's going to stay. But to be honest, I do like the Miami, seeing the optics, the backdrop of the waterfront, and, build up to the Grand Prix. I think the build up to the Grand Prix of Miami is better than Vegas, but Vegas has just got the bright lights, hence why they did it at night. But I think Miami would stay on. If they were to take one off, it'd probably be Texas, because they would probably want to go to another major market like a New York at some point. They'll probably just take off Texas and have New York, Miami, and Las Vegas, and hopefully we get a race in Africa. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's what Lewis was asking for. Obviously, just speaking of Lewis, because I think it was probably another disappointing weekend for Mercedes in terms of the Constructors' Championship. You could hear Russell was talking about he feels like a podium was just thrown away. Lewis had this thing where he had to go back to the back of the grid because of the tag and stuff. And now Ferrari are now 4 points behind them going into the final race, where if you said 3 weeks ago you thought Mercedes have second locked up, do you see Ferrari overtaking Mercedes in the final race in Abu Dhabi? I believe it is. Yeah, in Abu Dhabi this weekend.
Yeah, this week. No, because as much I like both of their drivers are very erratic. So there's always a situation where Carlos Sainz is gonna, get as much as I love him, probably engine, something with his car reliability, or just doesn't perform well, he doesn't get out of Q1 or Q2. Obviously, that can happen with Mercedes, but if you look at the Mercedes boys over the course of the year, I would say they've been more consistent than the Ferrari boys. So I don't see that happening. But who knows? Like, Abu Dhabi's always been a good circuit that Mercedes has performed well on when they've had a good car. But they don't. I wouldn't say necessarily they can't have a good car, but hopefully they optimize to perform well on that circuit. And they're able to win. I've always loved the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, just the optics and the backdrop of how it looks. Yas Marina looks sick anyway, so hopefully they can, finish the race in the top 3, or in the top 5, Lewis and Russell, and probably clinch second in the constructors championship. I think it will be a good year for Mercedes in terms of the trials and tribulations they have to go through, and they've overcome. But just hopefully next year they just have a more competitive car, because I don't think Formula One can deal with another dominant Red Bull like this. Where, bro, I looked at the
race this year.
Exactly, and bro, I looked at it, I was like, even Verstappen on his own, he would still be first. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to come to, because even though Mercedes finished 3rd last year, and even if they finished 2nd this year, which they've gone up, the gap between them, like, I'm just going to bring up, so
crazy.
Have 822 points, and the Mercedes are second with 392. Like, the gap is just massive.
Deep it. Mercedes are closer to the bottom team than they are to the top team. Make sense. Deep it.
Verstappen beats Mercedes on his own.
That's what I was about to say. I think Max will probably have nearly 400 points by himself, I believe.
Yeah, so even Mercedes have 392 and Max has 549.
They see? Imagine that. You can have 2 teams. You have Red Bull Racing, or you just have Max on his own, and he's still got it. And then you got Red Bull Racing. It's crazy. Like, you don't want to have a league or a championship where it's uneven. And I don't think F1 can afford to have another dominant season like that from Red Bull, because it doesn't make sense, man. It's just going to get boring. And
I don't think it's more to do with just dominance from Red Bull. I think you also look at it as dominance from just one driver. In terms of, and as I said, this weekend as well is one of those things that I've said is why sometimes I say I feel like Max season is just more than the car, because in a weekend where, as in, he once it wasn't fair, I think everyone would have picked them to win, but in a season where Leclerc could have really gone on to win this race, he was still able to pull it back, whereas you could see Leclerc was able to do Perez in the last lap and stuff. Obviously, I know the car is still the fastest, but I think there's been so many. Before you say, I think there's been a lot of races this year where you talk about weather change, safety cars, and different things like that. And Max and Red Bull have gotten it right. I think you look at the Dutch Grand Prix where the rain just started pouring out of nowhere, and some teams got it wrong in terms of staying out. Red Bull did it correct. You can see in terms of, I think, the safety car in Spa, how some teams reacted where Max is like, I want to stay out for one more lap so I don't get caught in the pit stop traffic. You can see, I think, Australia early on this. I think there's just been so many races where different teams have got it wrong, and Max and Red Bull have been consistently getting it right. So, yeah.
With that, bro, I think that's trial and error, because it could go the wrong way, and we could say, Max made a lot of bad mistakes. So I see that, but no, of course, but with Max's car is so dominant that even if you gave them a head start, he could still come back anyway. Because if you put, don't get me wrong, Max is a great driver, but if you compare him to other great drivers, a Vettel or Lewis Hamilton, and put them in that car, they'll be as dominant as Max. I'm not saying,
but what I'm saying, it kind of proved my point in terms of he's been his level is that high because Perez has not been able to achieve the same feat. That's my point. Like, obviously, because you're talking, you put elite drivers in that car, they were able to dominate. And I'm saying that I think, for me, this is what I'm saying, that it's not just the car. I think Max has been elite as well.
No, that's my point, though. But I'm saying Max has been elite. But if you put, for example, Max against Hamilton or Vettel in the same car, he wouldn't be that elite. That's what I'm trying to say. So it's because we're comparing him to a level of someone as Perez, that he is basically a second driver. He's never I love Perez, but when you saw him at McLaren, he was there for a year. They got rid of him, and when he's had his best years, is in those teams where he's middle in the pack. A Sauber where he's not expected to win, but he'll get a podium here. He'll start 18th and finish 3rd. That's his mindset. If you put another racer in that same Red Bull against Max will have fits, because Max has never been in that situation where he's had a driver that wants to compete against him. Lewis has. He's had Jenson Button. He's had Alonso. He's had Bottas. He's had Russell that's doing it now. And that's where Lewis Hamilton thrives. We haven't seen Max in that situation. And the way Red Bull works is they have a number 1 driver. And when that second driver tries to test the authority, he gets kicked out of the team. So we had it with Webber. Webber got kicked out. Then they brought in Ricciardo. Then they was trying to go Ricciardo. And then Vettel said, F this. Okay, cool. They booted out Vettel. Then they brought in Max. And then they designated Max as a number 1 guy. As soon as Ricciardo was trying to challenge and didn't like it, he got booted out. He went. Then they brought in Albon because they want to have a designated 1 and 2 driver. So it just shows how Red Bull's tactics are. They always favor the number 1 driver. There's no competition there.
Yeah, I know. We'll see what happens. As I said, Formula 1 is coming to an end, and I'm not going to say I'm Max's biggest fan, but I do think I'm going to be able to give him credit where credit is due, and I think he's had a very fantastic year. But more importantly, we're going to see what happens this Sunday, because this Sunday isn't just a throwaway race where the constructors are basically done. Second is still up to play for, and 4th is still up to play for McLaren and Aston Martin, who seem to have come back a bit in the final 2 races. So we'll see. But thank you for tuning into our live stream. Obviously, we didn't have a pod this week, but we will have a pod again next week. So, but just make sure you continue to follow us on all social media platforms, on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok at Outbound_UK has been rolling on the bottom. And thank you for tuning in. Until next time, safe.